Plan, allocate and monitor work in your own area of responsibility is Unit 13, which is part of the SCQF Level 8 Diploma in Project Management awarded by EAL. In this video I'm going to go through the unit, explain the criteria and guide you towards gathering evidence for this unit. In the unit summary, it describes the unit as being about the skills required to identify the skills available within the project team and to create a work plan which makes best use of those skills. The ability to set smart objectives for team members and to monitor and evaluate the progress of work against agreed standards and timescales and to make adjustments as required to ensure the success of the project. This unit is at SCQF Level 7 and there are 6 credit values for this unit. This unit has 4 learning outcomes. The first is being able to produce a work plan for your own area of responsibility. The second is being able to review and amend plans for work for your own area of responsibility and to provide feedback. The third outcome is being able to monitor the progress and quality of work in your own area of responsibility and provide feedback. And the fourth outcome is being able to allocate and agree responsibilities with the team members. The best way to go about gathering evidence for this unit is to focus more so on your other project management units. So for example, schedule, resource, quality, scope, and from that you'll be writing or gathering holistic evidence which will cover planning tasks, allocating tasks to team members, to colleagues, to stakeholders, organising and monitoring these tasks. Particularly outcome 3, most of your project management units such as scope, schedule, resources, quality, finance, contracts, they all have outcomes in those units that's about monitoring progress, and so there is a degree of overlap with outcome 3 and a lot of the other units, so there's a lot of opportunity there for holistic assessment or holistic gathering of evidence. Let's start now with the first outcome and the first criteria 1.1, explain the context in which work is to be undertaken. So this quite simply is to explain what the wider situation is in the workplace, why that task is important, what does it contribute to wider team goals, why are you doing that. Have a good think when you're gathering evidence on certain tasks you're completing and explain the background to it, and that will help to cover off this point. So tell me about a time where you were completing a task in work. What was the work completed? What is the wider context of completing the work, and how does the work contribute to the wider project or organisational goal? Product evidence for this would be a work plan. A work plan is simply a tracker which you can use to monitor activities. So the simplest form would be a spreadsheet where the first column is activity description. It also includes columns for start date, end date, duration, status, RAG status, who's responsible, that sort of thing. Might not necessarily be a Excel spreadsheet, it could also be a SharePoint site, it could be a PowerPoint, it could be a tool on your project management software, so it depends on what system that you're using in your organisation. 1.2 is identify the skills base and the resources available. So when you're planning a task, you need to understand what are the skills required, what people do you need, and why do you need those people. Usually it's because they've got a certain skill set or a certain experience, maybe they've done a similar task previously or they know how to do that. Some tasks require people with particular qualifications or education to complete, and so you'd want to be able to, first of all, be able to identify what skills are required for that task and also what resources. In addition to the people required, you probably also need resources to complete that task, equipment, maybe a computer or machinery, or consumable materials you might require for that task to be completed. So it depends on your task. But for this one, this is excellent to be done holistically as part of a holistic statement. And if you're discussing a task you've allocated to someone and you're saying these are the things that we require, then that will fall in to cover this point, and that would be the best way of tackling this unit as a whole, but particularly this outcome. So reflect on a task where you had to plan and allocate people with particular skills or resources to an activity. What was the task? What was needed to be done? What skills were required to complete the task, and what resources were required, and how did you identify these? Product evidence could be within the project management plan, could be a work plan, or it could be communication where you're discussing with colleagues what skills are required. So perhaps someone's asked you to organise something, maybe you responded to them and asked, well, what is it you need? What experience employees do you need to complete this task? What resources do you need? What standards are at? 1.3, examine priorities and success criteria needed for a team. So this should be maybe a broader goal, so maybe not one individual task, but maybe a group of tasks or activities that need completed, and you want to examine what is the success criteria. What does it mean if this task is successful? What would that look like? And also for priorities, it's about saying what is the main thing you want to get out. You know, if something was to go wrong, it's fine if it goes wrong with something that's not really as important. It was a good to have. But if it's something that's of a high priority, then that needs to be successful. So it's about examining what does that mean for the task that you're allocating. Again, this is an easy one to add into holistic evidence. So performance task, reflecting a time when you're completing a task or working as part of a team. What was the task? How did you identify the priorities? What were the priorities? How did you identify the success criteria, and what was the success criteria? Product evidence is, it could be a work plan, and it's going to be the same for most of the criteria in this unit. Work plans are excellent evidence, product evidence for this. It could be in your business case, or it could be communication as well. 1.4, produce a work plan for your own area of responsibility. I've already discussed what a work plan is. It's essentially a tracker. So any sort of tracker that you use in the workplace to track, monitor and allocate tasks to people, that would be a work plan. And quite simply, you're reflecting on or gathering evidence on how you put that plan together. So reflect on a time when you're working on a task. How did you identify the activity? Who was responsible? How did you identify what the start date, the end date and the duration was? How did you identify the order and the dependencies of action? How did you monitor progress? Work plans should include activities, responsibilities and duration of task. It can be in a format of a report, network diagram, Gantt chart, work breakdown structure with responsibilities, etc. So there's a wide range of different formatting for this sort of document, but they use the term work plan, so it is quite vague, so that whatever you use in your workplace can be used as evidence for this. And the other thing says there's a strong link here with the schedule unit, obviously, but there's also strong links with other units. So the best way to do this is holistically. Product evidence would be a work plan or some form of tracker. Moving on now to the second outcome, 2.1, identify team members' responsibilities for identified work activities. So this should be about a time where you've allocated tasks to people, to a team, to individual team members, and you are being able to reflect on and identify and prove evidence that you know what their individual responsibilities are towards that wider goal. So in that sense, this is another good one to be part of a holistic statement where you are doing some process that involves allocating work to team members. So reflect on a time where you are completing a work activity. Who were the members of your team? What was their job role and what were their responsibilities for the work or activity or task? Product evidence could be some diagram, work tracker, role descriptions. You could have role descriptions, job descriptions for other people and include that as product evidence. Could include reporting links or a hierarchy chart, maybe an organisational chart or your organisational breakdown structure. 2.2, agree responsibilities and SMART targets with team members. So SMART targets stands for specific, measurable, achievable, realistic and time bound. Now a bit of a tip here is that all targets are by definition SMART essentially, if it is something that can be achieved. If it's not specific, whoever you've allocated tasks to won't know what it is. If it's not measurable, they don't know if they've achieved it. If it's not achievable, there's no point giving it because they're just setting them up to fail anyway. Same for realistic, and time bound is about setting a deadline. So all that means is you've put a deadline on there. Now I know some people can be a bit funny about putting deadlines on there, particularly if you're new and you're not too confident in your role yet. But it's important to put a deadline on there because if you don't give someone a deadline, if they're prioritising work effectively, they'll always prioritise work that's got a deadline before yours, and if yours doesn't have one, it'll always be at the bottom of the list. So it's important to include deadlines to any work that you're allocating people. So reflect on a time where you're working on a project. How did you agree responsibilities for the task? Who was part of the task? How did you set SMART objectives with other team members? And what were the SMART targets? What impact did this have on the task? Product evidence would be a work plan or an email outlining objectives and responsibilities which are SMART. Third outcome now, 3.1, identify ways to monitor progress and quality of work. Now there's a lot of overlap with this outcome and other units, so it's very likely you've already covered this if you've focused on your other units before you focused on this one, which would be the best way to go about it. But if you've not, this is simply about working at how you're going to monitor progress. So when you've allocated a task to somebody, how do you know that it's going to plan? How do you know it's on schedule? How do you know that resources are being used in the correct order and that they're available and that there isn't any issues or problems and no risks have occurred? What do you do to monitor the progress and the standard that the work's going to be completed at? So that should be fairly straightforward if you think about what you do as part of your job. So reflect the time you've had to monitor progress and quality. What was the task, deadlines and quality standards? How was it agreed, and how was the quality standards agreed and deadlines would be monitored? And how did you go about monitoring this? Product evidence would be a work plan, a tracker, or whichever monitoring progress. It could be reports that you run from your project management software. It could be progress calls that you have on a weekly or within a certain time period. Depends on what you're doing for this task. There's a variety of different ways that you can monitor progress, and the best practice for this would be have a number of different tasks and situations where you're monitoring work in different ways to show that you can use a variety of techniques to monitor progress. 3.2 is monitor and evaluate progress against agreed standards and provide feedback to team members. So this is you actually monitoring that progress and you're providing feedback to team members. Typically this would be if they are falling behind or if they are ahead of schedule. Sometimes being ahead of schedule can actually be an issue as well, depending on the specific project you're working on. But how do you provide feedback to say you're on progress or you're not on progress? A lot of the time this is going to be a progress and update call. Sometimes it could be emails. Sometimes you're just updating the tracker and saving it in a SharePoint site or a shared location. But it depends on what you're doing for your project. So reflecting a time where you've monitored progress. How did you identify the method you would use to monitor the work? What was the method? What was the agreed standards? How did you monitor and evaluate the progress as work was completed? And how did you provide feedback to team members? How did you not interfere with the work while monitoring its progress? Product evidence would be a work plan, a tracker or a progress document, and any sort of reporting that you've done. But specifically for this one, the feedback is the key bit. How are you communicating with stakeholders, and therefore communication would be an excellent form of evidence for this criteria. Now moving on to the last outcome, outcome 4. 4.1, review and amend a work plan where changes are needed. The first outcome is about putting together a work plan. You've put it together, you've allocated the tasks, you've monitored progress, but sometimes you have to update the plan because there's been a change, a risk has occurred, or the situation has changed. You've realised something, or something's became apparent that wasn't clear when you were planning the task, and so you'd have to update the plan. There's a strong overlap here with the outcome in scope management. It's about change control, and there's also relevant outcomes in most of the other project management units, which is about updating and making changes to plans as the project goes on. So it's quite easy to get this outcome holistically as well. So review and amend work plan where changes are needed. This is on a change that's to a schedule activity or a resource activity or a risk activity. It's quite easy to do this holistically and map the same evidence into these units and also into scope. So for this one, it's just that you're updating the plan. So there's been a change, you follow the correct change control process. If this is a small activity, it might not be necessary to follow the full change control process. It could be something that's quite minor and can be dealt with at a lower level, and that's fine for this one as well, but maybe wouldn't be fine for the outcome in scope. So reflect on a time where you've had to make revisions to a work plan. What was the task? What caused the need for revision? How did you decide on contingency? How did you update the plan? What impact does this have on the activity of the project? Product evidence for this would be an updated work plan in the form of a Gantt chart, network diagram, work breakdown structure or report. It could also be communication about discussing, agreeing and approving the changes and then communicating out the updated plan. It might be that you don't email it out, it might be a progress call. It could be saved in a SharePoint or in a shared folder where stakeholders that need access to it can access it, but it depends on the method that you're using will determine the sort of product evidence that you can gather for this criteria. And 4.2, communicate changes to team members. That's sort of what I said there at the end. You've made the changes and it's important that you can evidence that you can communicate those changes out to team members. There's no point making the change and not letting anyone know, because everyone else will continue on as normal as it was before. They won't know about the change. So reflect on a time you've had to make revisions to work plan. How did you update the plan? What is the procedure for communicating changes to team members and stakeholders? How did you communicate it to team members and stakeholders? What feedback did you receive? And reflect on why it's important to follow this process regarding changes to a work plan. Product evidence would therefore be some form of communication, or if you saved it in a shared folder or SharePoint, it'd be maybe a screenshot of that, of you uploading that, or if it's a progress call, it should be maybe a screenshot of the die invite, description of what went on in the call. If you've had any slides or any materials that you would do a screen share with, sometimes it's a PowerPoint, and you'd update that, then that could also be used as product evidence, that PowerPoint slide. So thanks for listening, and hopefully that helps you gather evidence for this unit.